So there's the concept of introvert, extrovert. Everybody's intrigued by this because you know why? You always want to know, am I an introvert or am I an extrovert? And I mean, there's the very shallow or superficial definition of introvert, extrovert, which goes like this. Introverts are people who like to be alone. They prefer alone than being with others. An extrovert is a party person, likes other people. And that's one interpretation. Other people like say introverts are very introspective. They're sometimes more morose, more, I want to say depressed, they're more serious, more intense. An extrovert is far more light-spirited. I mean, they're all interconnected. This is the usual conventional definition. I'm not saying they're even accurate definitions, but again, like I just said with language, before you talk about introvert, extrovert, you have to know what you're talking about. If I say introvert, someone may say that means something else to me. But the question that people have is, okay, so which type am I? You know, is it true that you can just say the criteria is that when you go, do you like to go to a party or would you rather stay alone by yourself? If your friends say we're going out, would you say, you know what, take a rain check? And you don't prefer. Even if you do go to a party, you're not going to meet people, you're going more for the experience or for something else. These are all questions that we ask. And even if we come to an answer and say, you know what, I think I'm more introverted or I'm more extroverted, the next question is this nurture or nature? Were you born that way or you became that way? In other words, did you grow up in a home where perhaps that was the attitude of your parents? So it wasn't necessarily you're born with it, it's not genetic, but it's, the culture that you're around. So often we copy what we see. You know, where we learn, we assume what we consume, as they say. So that means that what you see and what you experience around you becomes your model. Like, where do we learn about love? Where do we learn about coping mechanisms? How do we learn to interact with each other? The first place we learn as children, impressionable children, is from our parents. So if they communicate well, it's usually a good sign you will be a good communicator. If they communicate badly, meaning they yell at each other, or they don't know how to communicate, or silent treatment, or passive-aggressive behavior, or aggressive behavior, or other forms, this often becomes our first template that we experience, and very often that becomes our only template. As you grow older, you hopefully can think openly and say, you know what, maybe this isn't the best way, etc. I don't want to go so much into that. I'm talking about the extrovert. Introvert is often very much nurtured versus nature. But there's also nature. Some people genetically and hereditarily just simply inherit a certain personality, a certain disposition that's more introverted. Some people say introversion is connected with being shy. A shy person is an introverted person. Others will say that's not correct at all. A shy person doesn't necessarily mean introvert. You can be shy and be an extrovert. You can be shy because for whatever reason, when you were younger, you may be embarrassed. Maybe you're a very sensitive person. That doesn't make you an introvert. It just means that you may be shy until you get over it. Then there are people that are fundamentally shy. So the list goes on, and I'm obviously not going to exhaust every possible scenario. I want to address a certain theme here, but I do want to talk about it somewhat comprehensively because there are many different ways to look at it. And why is it so relevant to us? Even though maybe it doesn't have to be stated because it's pretty clear. Because the more you know yourself, the more you can grow. The more you can figure out, is this something healthy about me? Is this unhealthy? Is it something I should try to overcome or something I should embrace? Know thyself is one of the first steps in really becoming an independent individual, because you definitely don't want to become like someone else. You don't want to spend the rest of your life trying to be someone else. You want to be yourself. So you want to say to yourself, okay, so I want to know, what am I like? And this makes a big difference because then you can focus. If you, for example, identify that you're a real natural introvert, there's no reason to fight City Hall, so to speak, and suddenly try to be someone else. However, there is a perception in society today that introverts are inferior to extroverts. That's the extroverts that are going to succeed in life because they are go-getters. They go out there, they meet people, they network, they like that whole human interaction. And an introvert's going to get hurt more because of their internal nature, and people don't understand them necessarily. They don't always speak up for themselves, not because they're not good people, it's that they will be at a disadvantage, especially in a society like ours, where we live, where it's defined by aggression. If you want a job, you got to go get it. You have to compete with others. You're at a job where there's a lot of people working. You want to show your boss that you're better than your peers. You want to get a raise. You want to get a promotion. So we live in a capitalistic society that is definitely built on that type of competitiveness. And often we become someone we not even want to be. Often we become a lot more aggressive than we really naturally are. I remember many, many times. I remember after 9/11, a particular story about an individual. It's a long story. I'm not going to go through the details, but somebody basically was killed in the World Trade Center. And he had a friend. They were in school together, but that friend was always resentful of him because he had this office in, Cantor Fitzgerald was one of the big firms where so many people died that tragic morning. And he had an office in some little dingy place a few blocks away, and he was always jealous of his friend who had these scenic, what do they call them, the bay windows. You saw the whole Hudson River, and you could see like halfway through America or something. And he was in this little office. And then that morning, his friend was killed. And he remembers how his whole life was driven by his jealousy. He was so jealous of him. Came to realize that, he became someone he wasn't. He says, we were such close friends. Not that he blamed himself for anything that happened, but it was just his own feeling. He realized, when someone dies and so tragically dies, you suddenly realize where are your priorities. So we sometimes become people we're not even meant to be, or we don't even like, because of the forces of the marketplace and of economic pressures and other things. So all this comes into play in looking at yourself. Who am I and what am I like? And this is something that, as I said, I talk about almost on a weekly basis, just different aspects of it. So this introvert, extrovert, the first thing you need to do is define what it means. And is it true? Is it true to say that an introvert is at a disadvantage and inferior to an extrovert? As a matter of fact, in the DMV, what's it called? No, not the DMV. No. The American Psychiatric Association has a manual. The DSM. I said DV. What did I say? The Department of Motor. I was thinking about it. I was thinking about a ticket I have to pay. No, not DMV. What did I say? DSM. Right. The DSM manual, which classifies all the mental illnesses. So they actually until 2010, they considered the introverted personality as a defect. Can you imagine? They consider it as a defect it's a disorder. They've changed that, but till 2010, just talking about 8 years ago. So that's the extent how society sometimes sees and misunderstands introverts. I remember, like everybody I'm sure remembers, I had classmates in my class when I was a kid. I remember one particular guy was so very quiet. It would be like the classic introvert. And everybody thought, including the teacher, that he was a stupid guy. Because whenever any challenge or any particular question was raised, he was always quiet. Teacher looked to him, he was too shy to speak. I got to know him over the years. We went to elementary school together, and I came to realize the guy is brilliant. He's probably the smartest guy in the class. I mean, he had many challenges in his life as we went to high school and so on, but he was the smartest guy in the class, no question about it. He was just a very, very internal, very what we call in Hasidic language, pnimiizdik. He was an internal person. He was a very quality person. And he was a kid. I mean, we were children, so it wasn't like developed and matured yet. But he was a person, had not other circumstances in life come in the way, would have been unbelievable. Really sincere, gentle, very sensitive person. Really understood other people. He had a deep empathy. And if you really get to know him, you start saying, is this guy, what is he exactly? Now, is he an introvert? As I said, I still haven't defined even the word in a way that's acceptable to all of us. But he definitely appeared like an introvert because he would not go out. He was not interested in parties. He wasn't interested in people. Even, in the beginning, he wouldn't even show friendship. I didn't have to pull teeth because he did have what to say. But we became very friendly. And I recently met him even years later. As I said, he had other things that got into the way of his life. But it was a classic. I remember the misunderstanding of a child that can be the best kid in the class, but nobody understands the person because, we like cookie cutter model. You like the popular kid everyone likes. When there's not necessarily the best person in the room. Now, he wasn't bullied, thank God, so he didn't have that problem. But sometimes this type of children are also bullied because they seem vulnerable and they seem, you can pick on them. The point is that so much of our lives as children, as we grow up, is so defined by how others see us in this context, our social status. and how popular we are and how outgoing we are, how not outgoing we are. And very often the introverts get the brunt of the criticism as being, oh, he's a loner. He's a brood, he likes to brood, he or she. So this is really a tremendous, it's a critical aspect to our personality and our lives to address this topic. So how do we look at this? So here's the interesting point. And I'm taking what I'm saying now primarily from mystical teachings, Kabbalistic and Hasidic teachings. And I'm not going to quote exact sources right now, but coming from that place, talking about what really defines a human being. Okay, what defines a human being? Are we, as I said, are we really wired that way? Some of us are wired extroverts and some as introverts. Is it something, like I said before, we assume through nurture, through education, through influences around us, or there's something more going on? And the answer is there is absolutely more going on. Because you can't answer the question, are you an introvert or extrovert, if you don't first answer a bigger question, which is, what makes us tick? Who is the human being? Before we start classifying and labeling people, you're extrovert, you're introvert, let's define who are you, what do we know for sure about a person? And here we get into a very interesting analysis. Because if you go by the terms of modern psychology, which is really around 100 years old, a little more, 110, 120 years old. Sigmund Freud, the good Jew, the good Jewish mother, is considered the father of modern psychology. Today, absolutely, there are many who have wandered, who have definitely digressed from his approach and actually adamantly disagreed with his approach. But he's still the guy to disagree with. He's still Freud. You always hear his name. He's the guy that you don't agree with. So you have the different schools of thought, whether it was Jung or Adler or others or Viktor Frankl. My point that I'm really making here is not to get into the comparison of different psychological models, but rather just to tell you, modern psychology is only 100 years old. It's not a long time. So you can imagine it's in its infancy, really. I mean, there's some that even say psychology is not even a real science. Some say in comparison to true medicine or true mathematics, the real physical sciences, they'll call psychology quack medicine. Yeah, it's called that. Check it out on Wikipedia. On the other hand, the fact of the matter is there are psychiatrists, there are psychologists, there are therapists and social workers, and they probably outnumber medical doctors. No one even knows the numbers, but it's definitely in the millions. Some people say there are more psychotherapists than there are clients in the world today. And others insightfully say that every therapist should be a client, or maybe is. That's why they go into therapy, because they need help themselves. Well, however you twist and turn it, the bottom line is psychology is not some type of tangential and marginal factor in life. It's absolutely very much part of our culture. And today it's like people are even proud. They say, here's my dentist, my doctor, my therapist. It goes like, my accountant, my lawyer. It's on there. Some people even have it on their business card. I never saw that. That's it's meant to be a joke. Yeah. Okay. You're allowed to laugh, by the way, in this class. There's no need to control yourself. Just for the record, I don't know, maybe think that you have to be reverent. Right, Moshe, is that true? Okay. Good. Laughter. So, my point is then where do we turn to if you want to ask the question, who are you? What makes you tick? I always mention this because it happens to be true, as ridiculous as it is. You ask most people, who are you? They actually give you their business card. I've tested this. And when you say to them, but this is what you do, this is not who you are, they say, oh, good point. Okay? What does that tell you? That most people never think about who they are. They're more involved with what they do than who they are. What do you mean what they do? Their job. Because that's what preoccupies your life. When you're younger, officially, and you should have the time to be exploring who you are. But once you get into the rat race and the merry-go-round of life, the roller coaster, and you have to pay bills, and you have responsibility, and you have a family to take care of, like many people say, I don't have the luxury to ask who I am. I don't have time. I have to pay. I have to make ends meet. So basically, what you do controls who you are, and the who you are goes undercover, with statistics showing that most people don't even like their jobs. So not only is what you do is not who you are, it's actually contradictory to who you are. So you'll say to somebody, if it's not who you are, why are you doing this? You say, I need to pay my bills. This job came my way. If it was up to my dreams and my ideals, I would never be doing this. How many people will say that? Many. Then there are people who come to terms and say, you know what, I didn't like this job, but this is what I do, and I learned to love it, or I learned to tolerate it, I learned to accept it. And then there's the rare few that will say, I make a livelihood from the thing I love. It's a labor of love. I actually do the thing that is closest to my heart and soul. But that's a very small part of the population. How that works, and again, it's not the topic I want to talk about, just talking about it because the issue of who you are is not really a prominent question that children are forced to ask. So we go through school, we learn a lot about the tools of life, how to do things. So you come away, in the best scenario, with an excellent education, so you have an excellent tool chest. But if someone asks you, so who are you? You say, well, I never took that course. Now some of us figure it out due to our own life experiences, or our parents are good influences in that way. But some of us, I know people, PhDs in everything under the sun, and they have no clue who they are. They have no clue about what really makes themselves tick. They're very knowledgeable. Oscar Wilde put it this way: there are people who know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. Or another way to put it is, you know more and more about less and less. So just to have a lot of knowledge doesn't necessarily mean you know qualitatively about life. You just know a lot of quantity, a lot of information. Computers today have much more data than any mind does. That doesn't make a computer self-aware. So knowledge is not a guarantee that is going to make you self-aware. So psychology is meant to address some of that. Psychology is rooted in the Latin term psych and ology, which means study of the soul. Logy is the study, and psyche is the Latin or Greek word for soul. So it's the study of the soul. Not necessarily the religious context soul, but soul meaning not what you do, but who you are. And here you're going to go through, literally, if you go through psychological models, literally from one end of the spectrum to the next. Freud, mentioning him again, would say that the core of a human being is what he calls in German the id. The id is the core raw you is raw pleasure, sexual pleasure. Whatever, me. That's what it is. But it's regulated by the ego and the superego. So therefore we become socially proper to coexist with each other. But if push comes to shove, if you were to cut through all the layers, a human being is a selfish narcissist. This is Freud's analysis of the human being. You go to the other extreme, Viktor Frankl, for instance, will say no. Man searched for meaning, logotherapy. He will say the core of a human being is the search for meaning. With all the different evidence he has, and he was in the camps during the Holocaust, and demonstrated how people who had meaning in their lives were able to survive even the harshest situations because they had something transcendent. Jung also, much more spiritual than compared to the raw, let's call it materialistic view of Freud. Not to say that Freud's view is not sophisticated, but it defines a human being in a very defined way. So then you ask yourself the question, so how do we come to the conclusion? What is the human being? Who's the human being? Who am I? Am I at heart a narcissist and a selfish person? As is proven, for example, in scenarios where people get caught trapped in an avalanche. Or you see in times during the Holocaust, when you're tortured, how people turn on each other. Very fine, good people could suddenly become cannibalistic and actually kill somebody because they're so hungry. They'll kill the weak one. You have scenarios like this. And you ask yourself a question, God forbid no one should ever be in this situation. What would you do if you were desperate? Would you turn your friends in if you could save your own skin, as some of the capos did during the Holocaust? Would you stoop to a level that is beyond human, below human, in order for your own survival? So some psychologists say When we're in the regular situation, most of us have an etiquette and a certain proper behavior. But put somebody in extreme circumstances where they're tortured, or they're starving from hunger, or there's a gun to their head, or they're trying to save their own lives, they can suddenly become monsters and animals and turn on each other. Everybody read Lord of the Flies, which was a study of children in that circumstance, what they can do to each other, the cruelty. So you can make a very strong case that at the heart, the soul of who a human being is very ugly. And we just have layers of, it's packaged nicely on the outer layers. Or we have the opposite scenarios. You have people who, in the harshest circumstances, became the most noble. Died before they would turn someone else in. Sacrificed their lives for even a stranger. Gave someone else the bread to eat before they would eat it, even though they died because of it. So you can see human beings rising to even higher than angelic heights. So which one are we, the angel or the devil at heart? So here I turn to a psychology that's longer than 110 years old or 100 years old. We'll call it the universal psychology of Torah or Judaism. And not only for Jews, for all people. And what does the Bible state right in the beginning? Man, the human being, was created in the divine image. It's the first statement about a human being. The first. Nothing comes before that. Not an intelligent creature, not an emotional creature, not a sexual creature. A creature created in the divine image, which right away gives you like a piece of God, an image of God. Then in the next chapter, we read another expression which is called Yetzer Leva Adam Ramin Urav, that the Yetzer, the inclination of a person, is evil from childhood. This is the root for the word Yetzer Hara. So we have another voice inside of us that is selfish and narcissistic, and me, as opposed to, instead of giving, taking. Selfish instead of selfless. So which one are we? If you read the Bible literally, it would appear that we're really the divine image, and then we have another voice, because that's the order. But you could easily argue, and this is the way it's argued, this is actually the whole Tanya is based on this, from Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, and other texts that talk about this, which is really based on what's called the Shari Kedusha, the gates of Kedusha, of holiness, from Rab Chaim Vital, the great student of the Holy Arizal. So it goes back now 500 years, where he writes that every person has two souls. So every person has two voices. One is the divine and one is the animal. One is selfish and driven by survival. The other one is driven by transcendence. One voice is take care of myself, the other one is to change the world in some way, to bring light and warmth to others. You get the idea. So we could say then that the identity of a human being is like two voices, and they're in struggle, they're in battle with each other. Like Yaakov and Esav, Jacob and Esav. From the mother's womb, they always struggled, as the Torah says. They were two nations that she carried, two archetypes. One the warrior, and one the scholar. I'm intentionally using that expression. So now, once you get to that place, you say, okay, so what makes us tick? Makes us tick is that we have a soul inside of us. We actually have two. And one of them is driven by survival and one's own needs. And the other one is driven by a higher purpose. And we see this all the time. Who doesn't have this struggle? Every one of us has. Every minute of our lives. Am I going to do something for me? Or am I going to do something for someone else? Am I going to indulge, or am I going to be more sensitive? And it permeates every aspect, every choice we make in our lives. It lies at the heart of relationships. You have a partner, you have a spouse. Is it all about me, and my spouse is here to serve me? Or is this a mutual partnership? Give and take. And there's humility, and there's a giving. You're not just here to take. There's a selflessness. Relationships that have one or the other are not going to function well. They'll be dysfunctional. So you need to definitely have to take care of yourself, because you have an identity, but you also you're in a relationship with someone else. It's not just about you. You could put it the way Hillel said, it may not nearly me, if I'm only for myself, if I won't be for myself, what am I? And the other side of it, if I'm only for myself, what am I? So which one is it? It sounds contradictory when you first read it. The answer is not contradictory because we need two things. We need an identity. We need an independent individual identity. That's healthy to have. But you don't have an individual identity at the expense of everything else. And the simple analogy for this is when you look around, look at everything in nature. Look at your own human healthy body. You see it all the time. Look at the human body. You have a mind, you have a heart, you have different organs, lungs, liver, kidneys. I'm just listing a few. Millions of different pieces. Are they individuals or are they team players? The answer is both. If they're not going to do what they have to do, then you will have destruction. If they only do what they have to do and they don't interact with anything else in your body, there will also be destruction. So the best example is like a symphony, an orchestra. You can have 100 instruments, 100 musicians playing different instruments. They each know when to play comes their turn, but they also then defer to the next step. And that's what makes it beautiful. We call that harmony within diversity. So it's not singularity of one single cell or one single unit. Everyone is an individual, but every individual is aware that it complements and is complemented by the others. And yes, it sounds like a paradox, but that's the only way true healthy organisms work. This paradox of individual balanced with others. Exactly like Hillel said, if I'm not going to be for myself, if you're not going to do your job and say, what, I'm just relying on the crowd or everyone else, no. You need to do what you have to do. The mind cannot be the heart. The heart can't be the liver. On the other hand, they each defer, they each see to or yield to the others as they all interact with each other. So in essence, you really need the two souls, because even the animal soul is not a bad thing. It's fine to to take care of your own needs. We have the concept, chayecha koidmin, my life comes first. You have to take care of your own needs. You can't just be a selfless creature that doesn't think about yourself and only about others. That's not healthy either. But you can't think only about yourself. That's the point. It has to be a balance. And now let's take it to the extrovert and introvert issue. I mentioned Jacob and Esau, the twins. If you're on a surface level, it would seem that Esau is the extrovert and Yaakov is the introvert. Very simply, the verse comes that they grew up, and one was Ish Tam Yeshiv Ahalim. Jacob meant the innocent, simple, Tam, sincere one, the one that sat in the tents. He was a scholar, very introverted life. He sat with the books. The other is described, Esav, Ish Mohammed Yeditzayid, a warrior who was a hunter. He mastered the hunt. That's a go-getter. That's a hunter. That's a warrior. If you think of it in terms of society today, you have people who are more the scholars, the introspective ones, the ones that are behind library walls, in academia. And then you have the go-getters, the aggressive business people who build things and go out there. They're the hunters. They're the warriors. Which one are you and I? The answer is we're both. We should be both. Because they both are necessary in life. So you'll say, one second, isn't Esau the bad guy and we want to eliminate him? No, that's not true. We don't want to eliminate him. We want him to balance him. You see, the end of the story is Jacob and Esau do reconcile. And not only that, it says at the end of days they will work side by side. Why? Because you need to have two sides to you. You need to be a person who goes out to get things. You can't just sit inside your own little castle. And on the other hand, you can't just be a person who's just an extrovert. You have to have introvert. You have to have introspective time. So if you really ask someone, I should rephrase that. If you really want to define what makes a healthy person has moments when they're there with themselves, and there's times where they're interacting with others. Anyone that has one extreme or the other, something's problematic. So then the question is, are there such a thing as an introvert, extrovert, objectively? Healthy introvert? Yes. There could be a primary, so-called a primary predisposition, that some people lean more toward the introvertive, others lean more to the extrovert. But everybody needs both. Think about it. Let's say the person who's the warrior, the person who's out there, loves to be with people, he's a social animal, party animal, loves to party. To do that 24/7, does that make sense? That person also has to sleep. No matter how many acid trips they are on, or how many other things that keep them awake. They have to sleep. They have to have some downtime for themselves. And if they don't, it's not healthy. Can you imagine somebody that's constantly on that what's the word I want to use? On that merry-go-round? It's always partying, always social, also always extrovert. We all need moments where we have to stop, pause, and say, okay, where do I stand? Introspection, a little accountability. On the other hand, the person who's complete introspective and stays there is what Hillel says. So is stay only for yourself, only an introvert, you're not going to be complete. We all need others, first of all, to complement us. Nobody is an island unto themselves. We need support. We need friends. We need companionship. I mentioned before relationships. A human being, a relationship, a marriage, is not just an optional, nice idea. It's actually a necessity. We need a companionship in this world. One of the most painful, saddest things is to be lonely. Loneliness can sometimes be worse than any disease. I mentioned a number of times when you read, for example, the book of Lamentations, Eicha. The first thing Jeremiah the prophet, the first thing he says when he witnesses the destruction of the first temple, he doesn't talk about the destruction, he doesn't talk about the deaths, he doesn't talk about the expulsion and the exile and the torture and all that. He says, Eicha Yashva Badad, alas, that she sits alone. The loneliness of Jerusalem was more painful to him than anything else. Because when a person has friends and has companions, we can get through anything. But when you feel isolated and alone, then you don't feel the strength to get through things. So the pain is pain. And there are many difficulties in life, but loneliness weakens the person's resolve. Companionship, friendship, you have others that care about you, gives you strength. So to say just introspection, just introvert, no, that cannot be the case. So the first half of Hillel's statement negates being total extrovert, which means I have to be for myself. And the second negates being a total introvert. If I'm only for myself, what will I? If I'm by myself, what will I be? So if you think of it that way, and I did a little research, I wanted to see extrovert, introvert in modern culture, and I realized that all that I just described is not even talked about. Right away, easily categorize people. Okay, this is an extrovert personality. The arguments are, what defines extrovert? Some say you could be an introvert personality can sometimes look like an extrovert. Extrovert can look like an introvert. And I'm not negating the fact that there's a leaning. We all have something, and we'll get to that soon. But this idea, this nuance, which is a lot more subtle and a lot more sophisticated, is that we all have both. And you can identify when you look for it. Unfortunately, what happens in life is we're sometimes forced to be someone we're not. Like for many of us, we cease to be the introvert because we're not comfortable there. I know people, personally, that talk to me, that come for counseling, or I come to this class, and tell me, I'm terrified. I remember I had one person, I said, it was a couple, they were just married. So I said, do you ever spend time with each other? Because every night they had money and they would party and they went every night another restaurant. You know, New York, you could spend 100 years and every night have another place to go eat. So no, they're always out. They're always doing things. So I said, any downtime you ever just sit? And we really explored, you know what it came down? They're both terrified of being alone with each other. Why? Because they saw relationships around them that were very painful. Both of them had parents that did not know how to communicate, a lot of fighting, and they're afraid of that type of just being vulnerable with each other. So they have all kinds of distractions, smoke screens. Here's our party, here's our wedding, we're traveling, here we go eat. So their whole introverted element, the healthy being introvert, I mean introspective, sit down, think about things, they are afraid to go there. So many people hide behind their activities. I'm so busy, I don't have time for myself. Well, some people, it's not that you don't have time. You don't want to have time because you're afraid what you're going to find. And you're afraid of meeting yourself. And I mean that literally, meeting who you really are. So you have all these things to keep you busy. Now, there's also the other extreme. People who are afraid of everybody else and they just stay alone, isolated all the time. The fact of the matter is, a healthy human being needs to be partial introvert, partial extrovert. That's the revelation that you don't find, as I said, in other schools of psychology, because they haven't come to realize that. Now, I'm not saying this has never been said by anybody, but definitely not developed into a whole approach. Now, let's talk about leaning. Now, obviously, everything in life, if someone will say to you, are you a cerebral person or an emotional person? Do you make decisions based on emotions or based on intellect? Now, we all have our leaning. Some people are very intuitive and very emotional. They base things on their instincts. Others are very cerebral, very calculated. They won't let their emotions into play. It's not even an appropriate question, to be honest. I would never phrase that question that way. It's a good question, it's a good conversation piece, and maybe a good pickup line. But if you really want to think about it, the real question is not that. The question is, we all have a mind and a heart. To say that one person is completely cerebral and another person is completely emotional is ridiculous. I wouldn't say ridiculous. There are people that escape there, but it's not the healthy balance. A healthy human being needs partial emotions and partial cerebral. However, you could say some people are more cerebral and less emotional, and others are more emotional and less cerebral. That's what you can say. And even that, you have to determine, is that who you really are, or that's just the tools you've developed? Because some people are great at hiding behind the mind games. I know people, they have an excuse for anything. You'll never get them anywhere because they are actually very fragile, very vulnerable, and very insecure. And how do they hide? They hide behind their mind. They can explain anything. And they can manipulate anyone with their minds. Any of you know such people? I know many such people. And if you say to them, you're just an insecure little child hiding behind a big computer, they are obviously going to give you very big reasons how you're so wrong. Obviously. And so therefore, the fact that some people use their mind a lot doesn't necessarily mean that they're more cerebral. It just means that's the tool they use to cover their tracks, to put it bluntly. Now, so how do you determine what is the healthy person and what is not? Well, firstly, if you're an honest person, and you're really looking for the truth, not just to be right, or not just to feel good about yourself, then you have to be open to hear some things you may not like to hear. Like a person like this that hides behind their mind, to be very honest, is going to have very difficulty in relationships. How will they ever really have a healthy marriage? They don't want to even ever be vulnerable. Never admit the mistake. Always feels the other person is a problem. And always have a good excuse with the mind. And remember, the mind is brilliant. The mind can do anything, can find an answer for anything. You can justify the killing of 6 million Jews with the mind, if you're pure cerebral. Where's the room for empathy? On the other hand, many of us our emotions control us. I would see probably a majority of people that make decisions based on emotions. And that too, how do you find the balance? That's why it's critical to have a measure of humility and look for the healthy template of who you really are. And this takes I'm digressing a bit, but not completely, so I'll just mention this briefly. What is the dilemma? How can you really discover who you are as opposed to what you're doing? I don't just mean your job, meaning the projected identity that you have versus your true identity. So you have to first identify, and I'll identify 3 factors that come into play that make a person be somebody who they're really not. In other words, you're born a certain way. Let's think of that as like freshly fallen snow. Yes, you have a genetic makeup that comes from your parents. No problem with that. But then life takes over. What are the 3 key factors that shape a person's life? 3 forms of subjectivity. They are, number 1, personal bias. You develop personal biases and prejudices and personal way of looking at things. So that can block you. Why? Because self-love distorts your way of thinking. You suddenly think that your way is better than everyone else's way simply because you're subjective in that fashion. So that's it's a natural self-blind spots that all of us have. We all have that natural biases. Again, that's not bad when you recognize it. It's bad when you don't recognize it. I'll get back to that in a minute. Second thing that can distort a person's identity or personality is parental influences. Attitudes your parents projected on you. To give extreme example, just to drive the point home. You come home from school. You feel good about what you just studied. But your father is always berating you. Everything is critical. And your mother's quiet. And even when you're proud of what you just did, your father starts knocking you and starts saying, no, you're just a disappointment. I'm using, of course, an extreme example. I mean, this happens day after day. What do you think happens to the child? This enthusiastic, bubbly, jovial child suddenly becomes afraid because they know that father is going to criticize. And therefore starts repressing their feelings and is not so excited about things. Basically, the parent, the critical parent, is undermining and invalidating a child's natural excitement and enthusiasm. And at some point, the child starts changing and adjusting to satisfy that parent. And all that natural self-confidence and self-esteem that this child deserved was robbed from it. It's not lost, but it goes undercover. This is not uncommon, what I just described. I gave us an extreme example. Some of us have it more milder. Some of us have it even worse. Abuse. So a normal child who's growing up and was going to have a healthy parents, what do? They validate. They nurture. They water. They cultivate. They reinforce the child's view and give it confidence to explore. Yes, that's beautiful. Try again. Even if the child fails, you don't just jump on the child. You help the child grow through failure, learn from your mistakes. What does that do? It infuses the child with a confidence. So parental influences a tremendous effect of how we will adjust our personalities and maybe wander away from who we naturally are to what the environment of our parents has created. And this can go, as I said, in a terrible way. It could also go in a good way. And finally, the third factor is social influences. Your friends, peer pressure, media, the things you see, the things you think will make you feel acceptable by others. And there too, you can suddenly start doing things that your natural instinct would never do, but everybody does it. So you don't want to be unpopular. You don't stand out as being different. So social, parental, and personal biases are three factors that play into every person's life because we all have all three. Nobody is immune. The difference between someone who grows into a healthy human being and one who doesn't is not because the person doesn't have biases, because they're aware of it. It's like I asked once a fellow who came to see me, I said to him, and he was a brilliant guy, he had an excuse for everything, like I mentioned, and I said to him, he's looking to get married, and he says nothing's working. He wants to know if there's a curse on him or something. Well, I said to him, sir, his name, I said, do you have any blind spots? I knew what he's going to answer. I was sure I knew what he was going to answer. And he answered, he says, no. He says, yes, but I know what they are. So I smiled. I said, so they're blind spots, you know what they are. That's like the doctor that tells you, I'll tell you when you need a second opinion. That's not what you want. A second opinion is a second opinion. That's not tell the doctor, tell him. Because you want to make sure the doctor didn't miss something. So the doctor's going to tell you, I'll tell you when I miss something. Not really. That's not exactly how you verify facts. That's what's called circular journalism, as is being now in the headlines. That, you verify your own thing. What's your source? I'm the source. Say, but I want to have an independent source. I'll tell you when you need an independent source. You get the idea. So I smiled. He says, why are you smiling? I said, because a blind spot means it's a blind spot. Not that you know what they are. And he wouldn't admit it. He just wouldn't accept it. Fine, so good. I couldn't help him. Can't help someone that's not helping themselves. The point I'm making here is all of us have these three forms of so-called possible distortions or biases. The difference is, are you acknowledging it? If you acknowledge it, you'll do something about it. What does that mean? If I know that I personally can have a bias because it's about me or about my friend or my brother or sister, I'll go to an objective party and say I need an objective opinion because I am not sure that I'm right. That's the first healthy thing a human being does to verify. Now, if you don't want to hear if you don't want to hear you're wrong, obviously you're not going to do that. But which intelligent person is going to do that? You're going to go buy a house and say, oh, you know what? I don't need a lawyer. I don't need a bank. I'm going to do it by my own. Good luck. Most people will understand because there it's not so emotional. You understand? You need a lawyer. You need a bank. You need a loan. You need whatever it needs. You're going to go build a building. I'm saying I want to have a 5-story mansion. You don't know a thing about contracting. You don't know a thing about architecture. You're going to start building it? Every intelligent person says, I got to hire someone that knows it. When it comes to our personal issues, it's much more touchy and much more sensitive because we don't want to acknowledge necessarily. So these three biases is what blocks us to really find out what we're like. If you can get through them, then you can begin to discover the real you, The real you, independent of these three influences, will then tell you whether you're leaning to being more extrovert or more introvert. Because I can assure you that most of us are one or the other, not because that's who naturally are. It's most likely because of the forces of life, the three factors that I just said, that drove you in that direction. Now, I'm not going to say absolutely, because there's no question that we also have a natural side to things, what we really made up. But the problem is we don't know. How do you know what's natural, what's not? So it's really coming to terms to discovering yourself and discovering these two forces inside of you and realizing that you need to have a balance. And yes, once you have the balance, you'll realize that some things you're stronger at than in others. Like some people are very clearly better to sit quietly in a room, to analyze, to dissect, to research. More of a very introverted approach. Others are excellent at pitching it or selling it to someone else. You'll see many good marketing firms or advertising firms or PR firms or even legal firms. You'll find there's the back end excellence and there's the front end.
Darwin and Huxley. Darwin and Huxley.
Okay, right. What's the back end? For example, the person who writes a press release is usually more of a research writer type. The person who gets on the phone to pitch the press release is usually much more of a socialite, someone that can connect to another person. Sometimes the good writers are not necessarily the best ones to sell even their own writing. You all know the story of Carl Reiner. Carl Reiner was one of the first TV producers. He basically is the father and creator of the sitcom, the half-hour or hour show that is now so popular, whether it's drama or comedy or whatever it may be. Carl Reiner in the 60s, brilliant writer, wealthy, wrote what was called one of the early sitcoms, was called one of the early comedies, the Dick Van Dyke Show. Okay? Before my time either, so it's not evidence of how old I am. Okay, but I read the story. It was very intriguing. He wrote the script, and of course now you have to choose actors who's going to play the script. So he, who acted, decided he's going to be the main character. Now he wrote the character, so he knows it well, and he thought he would present it best. And when they first piloted it, and they had the test audiences, what do they call them? These, Yeah, you have it's like a test audience. Focus group, that's the word. When they saw it, it's unanimous, or most of them said, you're not the right actor for it. It's a brilliant part and brilliant writing, but you're not the right actor. Now he was in control. He could do whatever he wants. He could have said, I don't care what you say, I want to do it, and that's that. But he was smart enough and humble enough. And maybe it wasn't humility. Maybe he wanted success more than being the actor. He went out to search and they found Dick Van Dyke. That's why it's called that show. Dick Van Dyke was the actor, and the show became one of the biggest hits, the model for so many other comedies that came later. Because he understood that though he wrote it, and though he basically created it from scratch, someone else was better at acting the part that he wrote than he himself could. That's an understanding that you realize that success is not dependent. You don't have to do everything. You have to just know what you're good at and let someone else do the other thing. Some people feel that they have to be the extrovert because they, for some reason, convinced those were the success stories in their lives. And there's some people who think the other way around. So it's just an example of this approach. And you'll find this, I remember in writing, when you write, I remember my literary agent told me, I asked him, what's the real definition of a good editor? There's the writer, there's the editor. Everybody needs an editor. So some arrogant writers say editors are failed writers, so that's why they go into editing. Since they can't write, they only come to edit and criticize other writers. Okay, I didn't really feel that way. So he told me a very interesting definition. He said an editor is someone that takes your writing and writes it better in your voice than you could have written it. Not someone who writes a new voice. That's not an editor, that's a new writer. Someone that writes your voice better than you could have written. And I realized that same idea, that the strength, but you need to be confident and secure and need to be ready to hear that. So to go back or sum up, what I was saying is that we all have the extrovert, introvert in us from birth. Both are necessary in life. And you see it in the Hillel's words. You see it in all of Jewish tradition. You see, for example, in the morning, you wake up, the first thing we do is read prayers. Then some study, or the other way around. And then you go out to work. So you begin like Yaakov, Ishtam Yoshev Ahalim, study, prayer. And then you, like the Esav that goes out, the warrior, and we're talking about in a kosher, good way, into business, into the work. Every week, we have 6 days of the week where we go out to work. And we have one Shabbos where we go in, back to home, back into our natural selves, our souls, a more soulful experience. And this balance is necessary for every human being in life. We all need the time where we go more internal and times we go more external. And the balance is when you're able to balance the two perfectly, which is effort, but you have to be able to understand these two elements. A person that's just out there and doesn't have time to plan, doesn't have time to introspectively look at something, evaluate it, properly do that, is not going to succeed fully. And someone that just is introspective and just plans all day and doesn't implement and execute is also not going to be complete. And there's many other manifestations of this in many different ways. And we have to always look at ourselves and say, which part of us is, what are we doing right now? Where are you more active in? Which world, the introvert or the extrovert? See if it's in a balanced way. And then try to see what you're like if you strip away the three biases I mentioned as much as possible, and see what do you like, not in the environment of your parents, not in the environment what society demands, and somewhat get an objective opinion by asking another person because you yourself may be biased. And I guarantee you, do the suggested things the exercises I just suggested, you'll find things about yourself you'd be surprised. Because there's always dimensions to us that we're not aware of. As self-aware as a person is, there's always more. Because we don't know what's lying beneath the surface. You only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know. So someone to say, I once did a little survey. I can't call it a scientific survey, but I asked around 100 people, maybe more, of different ages, from young childhood to all the way to the 90s. Men and women, Jewish and not Jewish, of all different persuasions. And my question was, in percentage, in a ratio form, in percentage form, how much do you know of yourself? 100% would be, I know everything about myself there is to know. 0 would be, I know nothing about myself. And the results were fascinating. No matter what persuasion, no matter what denomination, no matter what religion, culture, gender, it was all dependent on the age. The younger the age, obviously the 5-year-old was not capable of understanding such a question. So I think I started 11, 12 maybe. The younger the age, the more the percentage, the higher the percentage. 13, 14-year-olds were saying, I know 70, 80% of myself once I explained the question. And by the time I'm 30, 40, I'll know 100% or 99%. The higher the age, the percentage is reverse. Someone 20 years old starts saying 40%, 30%. Someone 50 years old says 20%. The 90-year-old, not one. They said, I don't know, maybe 1%. And I say, how do you explain that? They say, because the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. Because how do I know? How could I answer this question? You could only say, if you knew, for example, what's inside this hidden closet, you could say, okay, we revealed 10%. But if you don't even know what's inside, how could you say 10%? Maybe you don't even know 1%. How do you know what we carry and potential we carry inside ourselves? It's a very humbling exercise because you suddenly realize, 1 second, that's a good point. How much of your brain do you use? No one really has an answer, because they only have an answer if you knew the full capacity. When it comes to a hard drive on your computer, you could say, okay, 5, what are they today? Not 5. What's after gigs? The T with the T.
Terabytes.
Terabyte. 5 terabyte, 10 terabytes, 5 gig, 100 gig, whatever. Megabytes, kilobytes, whatever it is you want. So you could say the computer has maximum memory of 5 terabytes, and then you reach the place where the computer says no more memory. Very clear. So if you have 30%, it's 30% of 5 terabytes. But how many terabytes in the brain? Tell me how many ideas you think can fit in your brain. Do you think anyone's figured that out yet? No. Because no one has a clue. Because there's many ideas that are fit into our brain. You could always fit more. No one has ever come to a point where your brain tells you, hey, all the red lights go off. No more room for ideas. You know anyone that's ever complained and told you that? So we don't even know the potential that we have, the capacity that we have. That's why it's so vital to have friends and people that believe in you and don't take no for an answer. And there's no such thing as impossible, because you cannot say impossible if you don't know your capacity. Now, I understand, most of us understand that you cannot lift up 10 tons. We all have a limit of what we can lift. I'm not talking about that physical limit. But when you talk about emotional, psychological, and intellectual capacity, we are far, not close to our limits. That's why there's so much more to learn about oneself. And these exercises, the things I've been discussing, are great tools, I believe, to help a person get to that place. So, on a final note, I'll say this. In my own little experience in life, people I meet, my own observations, you find that every human being you meet has unbelievable, much more strengths and potential and beauty than they even know. Thank God I've been blessed to be able to see that. And it's a great thing to see, because I know people who see other people, they always see the negative in everyone. They see how little you can do. And they're always great to remind you, don't get your hopes up. Who do you think you are? So it's great to be able to look at people and be able to see that a soul's capacity is far more beautiful, more powerful than even you yourself may ever know. And seeing that gives you a lot of strength, because it helps you give you confidence in people. And then the question is, how do you help people get to that place? Like, let's put it the way Michelangelo said it. Michelangelo said it when he was asked, how do you carve those beautiful angels out of marble? He was a sculptor and an artist. So his answer was a brilliant answer. He said, I see the angels trapped in the marble, and I carved and set them free. So most people think, no, his brilliance was that he knew how to create an angel. He says, no, the angel was there. All I needed to do was get rid of the excess. The lesson of that is that we all are those angels, and we all are those flowers, and all have that music. But then there are things that grow on us, like weeds in a garden, layers, concrete, marble, other substances that block and don't let us access that potential we have. So it's a critical component is to learn how to recognize that there's those angels, and then do what's necessary to get rid of the excess, the sideshows, the means, to be able to let that shine. And very often we are our own worst enemies, because we don't believe in ourselves. And we buy into the myth that other people tell us that weaken our resolve and our self-confidence. So in seeing that, when you see it, you see both sides, the beauty of what people can be, and sometimes the pain of what people think they are. And it can be very disturbing when you see it very clearly, because you see, wow, look at this person, such great potential, but they're so far away because they think they can't do it. And it's an excellent way of looking at things. Sometimes, put it simplistically, I tell people, okay, tell me, you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution? It's critical to want to see yourself as part of the solution. Too many people are part of the problem. Part of the problem means you reinforce all these negative stuff. Being hopeless, sensing resignation, all these factors that we can resolve, demoralization. And it's vital to be a person that feels you're part of the solution. That doesn't mean it's all solved. It just means you're growing toward the solution. And the solution is what? The solution is that self-awareness and recognizing these different forces in our lives, the extrovert, introvert, and using it, actualizing it in every possible way. So in a way, you can say, our mission, our collective mission, is to help each other see that clear. As I said before, we're one grand symphony. Every one of us is an indispensable musical note, and can only be complete when we all play the music together. But we also have to have confidence in our own voice, in our own music. And that's the challenge, is to help people find that voice, and then help them see how they complement and others complement them. So I want to wish you all that you should be able to find and discover these tools. I hope some of the class that I give here, all the classes I give, tries to go in that direction and the empowering tools and skills to be able to discover these parts of yourself. And then, of course, most importantly, actualize it, because we're sent to this world to fulfill a mission. And each one of us has our indispensable mission that you and only you can accomplish. Period. So it'd be very sad if a person goes through their lives and is not even aware of it and doesn't actualize it. So my blessing to everybody this week is every week, but this week as well, is to find that part of yourself, the introvert within you, the extrovert within you. Make sure they know how to dance together. They complement each other because they both need each other. And to live a very blessed week and a blessed life. So it's a pleasure to speak to you a few words this week. I read it again? Okay, we'll read the dedication again. And then we go every week, Wednesday, 8:30 till approximately now. Those of you who have not been here before, online or in the class, meaningfullife.com, full array of resources in this spirit. And I want to again say the class was sponsored by Judith Kirk in memory of her brothers, Kalman Mordechai ben David Eliyahu, Beinish Getzel ben David Eliyahu, and her father David Eliyahu ben Avram Yitzchak, in honor of the birthdays of Yafa Rezel Bas Teva and Davida Batsheva Bas Yehudit Pearl. Okay. Everyone be blessed. Have a very beautiful week, and I look forward to see you again soon. Thank you.
Scattamo stanotti, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Gira musica, gira e non si ferma, come una galla do vento aita. Attira con narina, tamburello e abbacia come sua figliola. Scattamo stanotti, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Sinni e Tunu, i voti si danno, Tuna poco gli peputia. Sindaff e Tunu, i cappotti russi e si ricordano da notti buona. Scattamo stanotti, vini come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla.